The frost had not yet left the ground. The morning Nora Calloway's wagon wheel split clean through on the old Miller Road, and the only man for 3 miles in either direction happened to be Edmund Hargrove, 52 years old, widower, owner of the Hargrove cattle spread just past the tree line, a man who had long since made peace with spending the rest of his days alone. He heard the crack before he saw her. He'd been walking his fence line the way he did every Tuesday morning, coffee gone cold in his hand, the kind of quiet around him that most men find after they've stopped expecting anything from the world. Then the sound, sharp, like a rifle shot, came from somewhere down the road, and he set his cup on a post and walked toward it without hurrying, because Edmund Hargrove hadn't hurried toward anything in 11 years. She was standing beside the wagon when he came around the bend. 26 years old, Clara Finch, standing in the mud in her good boots, both hands on her hips, staring down at the shattered rear wheel the way a person stares at something that has made them very tired. The wheel had gone completely. The axle rested on the road. Behind her, the wagon bed held a crate of tools, a rolled canvas, and what appeared to be a surveying kit. She did not look up when she heard him approach. "I don't need help," she said. Edmund stopped. "All right." He stood there a moment. The wind moved through the spruce trees along the road. A raven called from somewhere north. "Though," she said, still not looking up, "if you happen to have a spare wheel and a jack within walking distance, I wouldn't say no to borrowing them." "I have both," he said. She looked up then. Her eyes were dark and direct, the kind that don't ask permission before they assess you. She looked at him the way she might look at a piece of land she was trying to price. Measuring, not unkind, but not warm either. She had red clay on her sleeve and a pencil tucked behind her ear. "I'm Edmund Hargrove," he said. "My spread's just through those trees." "Clara Finch," she said. "I'm the new land surveyor out of Pinecroft." He nodded. "You're on my road, I noticed." She looked back down at the wheel. "Is it a problem?" "Not usually," he said. "Come on. I'll get the jack." The county of Lanark had not had a woman surveyor before Clara Finch, and that fact followed her the way mud follows a wagon wheel, unavoidably, messily, and always just underfoot. She had come up from Pinecroft the previous autumn with her certification, a letter of appointment from the county office, and absolutely no interest in making it easy for anyone who had a problem with either. She was 26. She had been doing survey work in some form since she was 19, first as a chain carrier for her uncle's firm, then as a draftswoman, then sitting the certification exam twice, once failing, once passing, until she held the paper that said she knew what she was doing and she intended to use it. She had not planned on Edmund Hargrove. He brought the wheel jack from his barn without a lot of fuss, and he did not offer to do the repair for her. He set the equipment down, showed her where the stabilizer needed to go on that particular road surface, and then stood back and handed her tools when she asked for them. That was the part she remembered afterward, the standing back. Most men either took over or walked away. Edmund did neither. He just stood there in his quiet way, useful when she needed him, out of the way when she didn't. It took 40 minutes to swap the wheel. When it was done, she wiped her hands on a rag and looked at him. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," he said. "Happens to anyone on a road like this. I'd rather pay you." "I know," he said, "but it's still nothing." She put the rag in her coat pocket and looked at him steadily. "You're not trying to be charming, are you?" "No," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved just slightly. "I'm 52 years old. I left charming behind somewhere around 40. Clara Finch looked at him for another moment and then said, "Fair enough," and climbed back onto her wagon. She drove off without a wave, but she didn't drive fast, and when the road curved into the tree line, she didn't look back, which Edmund noted, because it meant she wasn't bothered by him watching her go. He stood on that road for a minute after she disappeared, his hands in his coat pockets, and then he walked back to his fence line and picked up the cold coffee from the post and finished it without making a face. She came back 3 weeks later, not to see him. He was clear about that in his own mind, but because her survey work had moved north along the Hargrove property line, and she needed access to the ridge above his east pasture. She rode up to his gate on a gray mare and called out from the road. He came out from the barn. "I need to go up on your east ridge," she said. "County work. I have the authority order if you want to see it." "No need," he said. "Gate's unlocked. Go ahead." She looked at him as if she'd been prepared for an argument and hadn't quite decided what to do with the absence of one. "Thank you," she said. "There's a dry creek crossing about halfway up," he said. "It's muddy. Stay left of the big spruce." "All right." She went. He watched the gray mare pick her way through the gate and then went back to work. At midday, riding back down through his property, Clara stopped at the barn because her canteen had gone empty and she'd seen the pump in the yard on her way up. She filled it and was walking back to her horse when Edmund came out of the barn with a sandwich wrapped in a cloth. "You had lunch?" he asked. "No." He held out the sandwich. She looked at it. It was a plain thing, bread, some cold meat, maybe mustard. Nothing fancy. "I made 2, he said. "My hands don't come in Tuesdays." She took the sandwich. They sat on the fence rail and ate without talking much. He asked about the survey work, not in the way people asked when they were making conversation, but the way people ask bonks when they actually want to know. She told him about the county's plan to redefine the water access boundaries along the creek systems north of the Miller Road, about the disputes that were already forming between the old settler families and the newer homesteads, about the particular difficulty of reading terrain that had been altered by 50 years of logging and flood. He listened the way very few people listen, without waiting for his turn to speak. "You know this land?" she said, not as a question. "Been here 30 years, he said. "Is that your whole life?" "Enough of it," he said. She ate the rest of her sandwich. 11 years ago. Your wife?" He looked at her sideways. "People talk," she said, not unkindly. "Small county. November," he said. "The 11th. Pneumonia. I'm sorry." "So am I," he said, and left it at that. The fence rail was cold. The afternoon light came low and pale through the spruce trees. Below them, his cattle moved in the pasture, slow, unhurried, the way everything moved on his land. "I should get back," she said. "All right." But she didn't move right away. She was looking at the cattle, at the way the light fell across the field, the way the land curved up toward the ridge. She had a surveyor's habit of looking at land as a set of measurements, but this was different. This was the way you look at something that surprises you by being beautiful. "It's a good spread," she said. "I know," he said. And it wasn't pride when he said it. It was the same simple fact as everything else he said. She swung down off the fence rail and walked to her horse. "I'll be on the ridge again Thursday," she said. "Gate'll be unlocked," he said. "Now, I want to stop here for a moment and speak to you directly. You, listening to this story right now. Where are you hearing this from? Are you sitting in your kitchen in Ontario, or out on a porch somewhere in Alberta, or maybe pulled up somewhere in BC with the mountains behind you? I ask because stories like this one belong to all of you. Stories about people who built something quiet and good in a country that has always made room for that kind of life. If this is landing somewhere true for you, leave a comment and tell me where you're from. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps more than you might think, and it tells me to keep finding stories worth telling. Now, back to Clara Finch and Edmund Hargrove. She came on Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and then a Tuesday in late November when the survey work had officially moved south, but she found a discrepancy in the east boundary markers that required. She said, with a straightforwardness that didn't quite conceal the faint note of pretext, another look at the ridge. He didn't say anything about it. He did start making 2 sandwiches on Tuesdays. The thing about Edmund was that he was not a man who reached for things. He had learned that particular stillness the hard way, not from wisdom but from grief, and the two things are not the same. though sometimes they look alike from a distance. After Margaret died, he had closed off a particular part of himself the way you close a room in a house that's become too large. Not locked, just shut, with the understanding that there was no good reason to go in there anymore. He was 52 years old. Clara Finch was 26. He was aware of the arithmetic. He was also aware, because he was not a foolish man, that something was happening on those fence rails and at that pump and on the road where her wheel had broken, something quiet and unhurried that had its own logic he wasn't entirely sure he should interfere with. He did not interfere with it. In December, the county survey work closed for the winter, and Clara returned her equipment to the Pinecroft office and took up lodgings at the boarding house in Aldermere, which was 12 miles from Edmund's spread. She did not come to the Ridge anymore because there was no professional reason to, and Clara Finch did not go places without a professional reason, or so she told herself. She thought about the fence rail. She thought about the way he listened. She thought about the way he'd said, "I know," about his spread, not proud, just honest, and the way he'd said Margaret's name without flinching, the way only someone who is fully grieved can say a name without flinching. She was not looking to fall in love with a 52-year-old widower. She also found that she was not looking for it. In January, she drove out to the Hargrove spread on the pretext of confirming a boundary reference she needed for her spring filing. The road was icy. She drove slowly. When she pulled up to the gate, it was Edmund himself who came out, not a hand, because his hands didn't come in winter, and he spent January doing the kind of maintenance work that fills the quiet months on a cattle spread. He opened the gate. "Clara," he said. "Edmund," she said. They looked at each other in the winter light, the cold making the air between them very clear. "I have a boundary question," she said. "You could have sent a letter," he said. "I know." He looked at her. She looked at him. "Coffee's on," he said. She tied her horse and went in. The house was the kind of house that a man builds to last and then lives in long enough that the house starts to carry his shape. The worn spot at the kitchen table where he sat each morning, the stack of almanacs by the window, the coat hooks arranged by which coat was used most. It was clean but not fussy. It smelled like wood smoke and coffee, and the particular smell of a house where someone has been alone long enough that it no longer apologizes for it. Clara sat at the table that had the worn spot and put her hands around the mug he set in front of her and did not ask her boundary question, because they both understood by this point that there was no boundary question. "I've been thinking," she said. "About? About the fact that I don't know what this is." She looked up at him. "And I'm usually better at knowing what things are. It's my job." Edmund sat down across from her. "What do you think it is?" "I think it's something," she said. "But I'm 26 and you're 52. "Yes, I know," he said. "Does it bother you?" He considered it the way he considered everything. Not quickly, not because he was slow, but because he believed that things worth considering deserved actual consideration. "What bothers me," he said, "is the idea of sending you back down that road without saying what I'd regret not saying." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "What would you regret not saying?" she asked. "That I think you're remarkable," he said, "and I don't say that to be charming. I say it because it's the plainest true thing I know about this situation, and I'm 52 years old, and I have stopped saying things that are less than plain and less than true." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the January wind moved through the spruce trees the same way it always did, steady, indifferent to everything except the direction it was going. "I'm not easy to be with," Clara said. "I noticed. I have opinions about everything. I noticed that too, and I'm not going to stop working. Not for anything." "I wouldn't want you to," he said. And he said it the way he said everything, without decoration, without the kind of gentleness that is actually condescension in a good coat. She looked at him. He looked back. Between them, the coffee steamed. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. It was not a grand declaration. It was the quietest kind of beginning, the kind that two people come to not because they swept each other off their feet, but because they stood near each other long enough, steadily enough, honestly enough, that turning away would have taken more effort than going forward. The county didn't know what to make of it. The Aldermere boarding house landlady, Mrs. Prentice, had opinions she shared at some length with anyone who sat still long enough. 26 years between them. Well, and her with that surveying business, out on the roads all hours. And him, old enough to be her father, practically. Well, Clara heard it all, the way you hear it when it's meant for you to hear it. And she said nothing, because she had learned very early that people who talk about what you're doing instead of doing something themselves have already told you what their opinion is worth. Edmund heard it too, through his hands and through the feed merchant in Aldermere, and through the Presbyterian minister who was not unkind but asked, with pastoral concern, whether Edmund had perhaps given this sufficient thought. "Reverend," Edmund said, "I'm 52. I've given most things sufficient thought." The minister had no answer for that. In March, when the survey season opened again and Clara was back on the ridge above the east pasture, she took to stopping at the farmhouse when her day was done. She would wash up at the pump and come in through the side door. He had given her a key to the side door in February, not as a statement, just as a practical matter, the way all things between them were practical. And she would sit at the table and they would talk while he finished whatever he was finishing. She told him about a dispute she was navigating between the Kowalski homestead and the Beaumont family over a creek diversion. He told her about a calf that had come early in the cold and that he'd spent 2 nights in the barn keeping alive. She asked if it had made it. He said yes. She said good. On an evening in late March, sitting at the table with the last of the light coming through the west window, Clara said, "My parents think I should come home to Pinecroft." Edmund looked up from the accounts he was going through. "They think this is." She made a small gesture that encompassed him, the kitchen, the whole situation. "Not sensible." "What do you think?" he said. "I think I've been sensible my whole life," she said. "I think I passed my certification exam twice, and I've been doing the work of 3 men for what they'd pay one, and I've been very sensible about all of it." She looked at her hands on the table. "I think I don't want to be sensible about this." Edmund set down his pen. "Then don't," he said. She looked at him. He was 52 years old, and he had the kind of face that years of outdoor work and quiet grief had made honest. Not handsome in any particular way, but true the way a landscape is true, the way a thing is true when it has been tested enough that there's nothing false left in it. "Will you marry me?" she said. He blinked. In 11 years, Edmund Hargrove had not expected anything, and here was a 26-year-old land surveyor sitting at his kitchen table asking him to marry her. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said, and picked up her coffee. They were married in May at the small Anglican church in Aldermere with a minister who had adjusted his pastoral concerns, and a congregation that was divided roughly between people who thought it was wonderful and people who were not sure but had come anyway, because Edmund Hargrove had been a fixture in that county for 30 years and nobody disliked him enough to stay home. Clara wore a cream-colored dress she had made herself. Practical cut, good fabric, exactly the dress she wanted. She carried a small bunch of wild columbine from the ridge above the east pasture because she liked the color and because it was her wedding and she was going to carry what she wanted. Edmund wore his good suit. His hands, which were large and calloused from 30 years of cattle work, held hers at the altar with a steadiness that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with the way he held everything, carefully, and with the understanding that what you hold matters. The county watched. And what they saw, those who were paying attention, was 2 people who had not fallen in love carelessly, but had come to it the way you come to something worth having, with full knowledge of what it cost, and full intention of paying it. There are things I could tell you about the years that followed. I could tell you about the winter when the creek flooded and Clara's survey equipment was saved by 3 inches of elevation she'd had the foresight to account for. About the morning Edmund turned 55, and Clara marked it by having the east fence line properly surveyed and staked, the way it hadn't been in 20 years, as a gift, because she knew the exact shape of what he loved, about the argument they had in the fall of their second year. A real one, the kind that sits in a house for a week and makes the air thick, and how they came through it, because neither of them was the kind of person who quits a thing they've decided to keep, about the daughter born when Clara was 29, on a Tuesday morning, in the farmhouse, with the spruce trees outside the window moving in the spring wind. Edmund was 55 when she was born. He held her the way he held everything, steadily, carefully, with full attention. Clara watched him and thought, yes, this is the right thing. This is exactly the right thing. Some people would say the age difference was the obstacle in this story. I'd say it was the fact that neither of them was particularly easy, and both of them had built lives that worked well enough without anyone else in them, and they had to choose, actively on a cold road and a fence rail and at a kitchen table with cold coffee, to let the other one in. The years between them were not nothing. They were real. But they were also simply a number, and the thing about numbers is that they measure quantity, not quality. How much of something, not what kind. Clara Finch was 26 years old, and she knew what the land was worth, and she knew her own mind, and she knew by the time she sat at that kitchen table in January exactly what she was choosing. Edmund Hargrove was 52 years old, and he had loved one woman and lost her, and he had thought the room was closed. He found out he was wrong the way we find out most true things. Not all at once, not with fanfare, but gradually on an ordinary road in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The frost had not yet left the ground when they met. By the time the columbine came up on the ridge, they were already something neither of them had quite had a word for. By May, they had one. That's the story of Clara and Edmund, and I hope it found you wherever you are tonight. If you made it this far, you know what these stories are about. They're not really about age, or land surveys, or wagon wheels on muddy roads. They're about the particular courage it takes to let something good happen to you when you've spent a long time making do without it. Thank you for spending part of your day here at Frontier Roots. Wherever you're sitting right now, whether there's snow on the ground or the first green is coming up. I hope something in this story reminded you that quiet, steady love is still the most durable thing there is. God bless you all. Keep riding.